The Roaring Twenties were not loud because of the engines or the factories. They were loud because of the confidence. If you stood on a street corner in New York City in the summer of 1929, you wouldn't have seen a crisis on the horizon. You would have seen an empire of optimism. The American machine seemed unstoppable, fueled by a new, intoxicating invention, easy credit. For the first time in history, you didn't need to be rich to live like a king. You just needed a signature. The stock market had ceased to be a place of investment and had become a national obsession, a casino where the house never seemed to win. Shoeshine boys gave tips to bankers, and housewives traded on margin, borrowing 90 cents for every dime they actually owned. It was a perfect, self-reinforcing loop of greed. The prices went up because people bought, and people bought because the prices went up. They called it a permanently high plateau. They believed they had solved the economic cycle, but they hadn't solved anything. They had merely delayed the reckoning. The illusion was so complete that when the cracks appeared, nobody recognized them. They saw minor corrections, not structural fractures. But beneath the surface, the leverage was toxic. The entire economy was balanced on a pinhead of debt. And when the sentiment shifted, gravity took over. It didn't start with a scream, it started with a whisper, a sudden realization that the paper wealth wasn't real. And then, in October, the floor fell out. It wasn't just that prices dropped, it was that the liquidity, the very ability to sell, evaporated. The panic that followed wasn't just about losing profit, it was about the sudden, terrifying realization that money itself could vanish. One moment, a portfolio was worth a fortune. The next, it was worth nothing. But the true horror began when the panic moved from Wall Street to Main Street. The trust that held the banking system together snapped. Men who had built their lives on the promise of security found themselves standing in line outside locked doors, pounding on the glass, demanding paper that no longer existed. The illusion of permanent prosperity didn't just fade, it shattered, leaving a generation to stare into the abyss of a decade-long winter. We often remember the Great Depression as a tragedy of poverty, but economically it was a tragedy of mechanics. It was a systemic failure of the plumbing that moves capital through a society. The crash didn't just destroy wealth, it destroyed the velocity of money. In a healthy economy, a dollar bill moves from a hand to a till, to a bank, to a loan, and back to a hand. It circulates. But in 1930, the circulation stopped. The blood of the economy coagulated. When the banks began to collapse, they didn't just lose deposits, they destroyed the mechanism of credit. As fear spread, hoarding began. A dollar under a mattress is safe, but it is economically dead. This triggered a catastrophic spiral known as debt deflation. As prices fell, the real value of debt rose. A mortgage taken out in 1928 became impossible to pay in 1931 because wages had collapsed, yet the debt remained fixed in nominal terms. Businesses couldn't sell goods, so they fired workers. Unemployed workers couldn't buy goods, so businesses lowered prices further. It was a feedback loop from hell. The central bankers of the time watched this happen with a detached academic paralysis. They misunderstood the nature of the beast. They worried about inflation when the world was drowning in deflation. They tightened credit when the system was screaming for liquidity. They believed that bad businesses needed to be purged, that the system needed to cleanse itself of the rot. But they didn't realize that in burning down the rot, they were burning down the foundation of civilization itself. Money didn't technically disappear from the earth, but it disappeared from functionality. The sheer scarcity of cash meant that trade reverted to barter in some towns. It was a lesson in how fragile the concept of value really is. Value is not inherent in gold or paper. Value is a byproduct of trust. When the banks closed, thousands of them, disappearing into the dust of history, they took that trust with them. The system had frozen, and no amount of hard work or American grit could thaw it out because the tool of recompense, money itself, had broken. It is comforting to look back at black and white photos of breadlines and think of them as ancient history, a mistake made by primitive economists who didn't understand the modern world. We tell ourselves that we have safeguards now, we have deposit insurance, we have sophisticated central banks, we have algorithms. But if you strip away the technology, you find the exact same human psychology driving the global economy today. The tools are different, but the architecture of risk is identical. We are currently living in an era of leverage that would make the margin traders of 1929 blush. The global financial system is saturated with debt, government debt, corporate debt, household debt. We have built asset bubbles not just in stocks, but in real estate, in bonds, and in entirely new synthetic instruments that few people truly understand. We have replaced the margin loans of the 20s with the derivatives of the 2020s, a shadow banking system that operates largely outside the view of regulators, moving trillions of dollars in silence. The danger today is not a lack of liquidity, but an addiction to it. Markets have been trained to believe that the central banks will always save them, that the Fed put is permanent. This moral hazard has encouraged risk-taking on a planetary scale. We have suppressed volatility for so long that we have forgotten what real risk looks like. We assume that because the system is complex, it is robust. But complexity does not equal strength. Complexity often hides fragility. Just like in 1929, the next crisis will not announce itself with a press release. It will arrive quietly, perhaps in an obscure corner of the bond market or a currency peg breaking in a developing nation. It will start with optimism, the belief that this time is different, but the mathematics of debt are unforgiving. When the confidence breaks, when the music stops, the exit doors will be just as narrow as they were a century ago. The Great Depression wasn't the end of money. It was proof that money can disappear overnight. It was a demonstration that the line between order and chaos is drawn in ink on a ledger. And as we look at the mounting debts and the soaring valuations of our own time, we must ask ourselves if we are walking the same path. The system has become faster, larger, and more digital, but it has not learned to be humble. The money is still here until the moment it isn't.